Testing 1, 2, 3. Good afternoon. I'm Chris Costelli with the Oregon Department of State Lands. I'm a policy and legislative analyst.
Hello, I'm Justin Kluwer with Pacific Energy Ventures, consultant working in this sector.
Julia Kelly, I'm the Ocean Energy Coordinator with ODFW.
Hi, I'm Scott McMullen with the Oregon Fishermen's Cable Committee, Mastroy.
Anno Husing, Director of the Lincoln County Planning and Development Department.
Laurel Hillman, Oregon Parks and Recreation Department.
Jason Bush, the Oregon Wave Energy Trust.
Andy Lanier, the Marine Affairs Coordinator for the Department of Land Conservation and Development.
Joanne Manson, Master Planner for the Oregon Military Department.
And on the phone, Walter?
Walter Chuck, Port of Newport.
And Judy?
Judy Linton with the Corps of Engineers.
Anybody else on the phone? I know Captain Rick Williams will be joining us by phone at about 1:45. So let's hit the folks in the audience real quick.
Ken Homolka, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'm Dave Fox, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Matt Sanders, Oregon Wave Energy Trust.
Wilson Gerald, University of Oregon law student and intern with Lincoln County.
Cole Cito, and Same.
And I'm Sabrina, Rules Coordinator, DSL.
So volume check. For folks on the phone, how are you hearing us?
Sounds good.
Good, just fine.
Good. Okay, excellent. So a couple housekeeping matters. Restrooms, out the door here, hang a left, you can't miss them. I think there are water fountains down that way.
Water fountains down there, yes.
Fantastic. If you didn't otherwise print out your own agenda packet for today, there's a stack of them right next to Andy there. If there's anybody in the audience that would like an agenda packet, just come on up and grab one. There is also, on top there, Andy, something different. That first.
So we do need one?
You want this?
I can share it with you.
So that is something different.
Okay.
I'll hand this one out.
It's a lot thicker than what
I apologize, I've got a separate sheet here that didn't make it into the agenda packet. For folks on the phone, when we get to this item where I'm going to talk about this one-page handout, don't worry, I'm going to read through it anyway, so you won't miss anything. Let's see, other housekeeping. Well, we don't have to worry about parking, that's nice.
Or tsunami.
Or tsunamis, for that matter, or 100-year floodplains. Let's see, anything else? Of course, cookies. Make sure you avail yourselves of the cookies.
Have you heard from either Keith Timchuk or who's the other person?
Nick Edwards.
Well, Nick was here last time, but
Charlie.
Robin Hartman.
Yeah.
Neither of those folks were at the last meeting, and they don't appear to be here today.
So Keith said he would be here today, so I'm not sure where he's at. Yeah, we did specifically pick a date to make sure he could be here since he missed the first one. So, and who else?
Robin Hartman?
Yeah, so she wasn't at the first meeting either. I tried phoning her. I didn't hear back. Yeah, let's see if we can figure out what's going on there, Chris. That's odd. Hopefully everything's okay.
We're working with her on another rack, so
handouts. So agenda today, pretty full one. I'm going to do a couple catch-up things from meeting number 1. Touch on a few products real quick from that. Chris has also prepared a couple memos to touch on some parking lot issues from meeting 1. You'll recall that we're sort of keeping a laundry list of all the issues that folks are bringing up that we can't necessarily deal with at the moment in time. So as those continue to come up, we'll continue to chart those. We're then going to switch over to have Jason give us a presentation on research and demonstration projects. That's going to segue us into a discussion about general authorizations versus general permits to get that regulatory approval from DSL that's now required as a result of Senate Bill 319. Hopefully today you'll have enough information that you can give Chris and I some direction as to whether you think research and demonstration projects are more appropriately steered towards the general authorization or the general permit. As part of that, I'll do a recap from meeting 1 to explain the differences again. After that, we're going to take a break. Then Chris is going to pick it up to talk about the resource inventory and effects evaluation checklist and the operations plan checklist that he's put together in draft form. Item number 7, we're going to talk about the JART structure and how that's going to work looking forward. We'll open it up for public comment after that. And then we'll talk about what our game plan is going to be for meeting number 3, including where we want to do that. If there's anything we can't finish today, we'll punt to meeting number 3, but with a little bit of luck, hopefully we can get through it all today. Any questions on the agenda? Folks on the phone, okay with the agenda?
And for just keeping some sort of order, I know we're a pretty small, intimate group today, but I would try to use the tense to just get our attention, whether it be Kirk or myself or whomever might be talking, you have questions, and I'll try to keep track of sort of the queue if we get a handful of those up.
Will we be branded undisciplined if we don't use it?
I think we can self-regulate ourselves.
I think some of us already have that brand, but we won't mention it. Okay, so let's get going right into agenda item number 3. So after meeting 1, Chris and I sent to you, I think about a week after that, you got an email that was a transcription of all the big Post-it sheets I put all over the room. So that is your first handout in the agenda packet. So the first page is agenda item number 4, expected topic areas for RAC engagement. So I'm not going to go over this in detail again, but I do want to explain the purpose of this now is basically this is the punch list for this group. By the end of this process, we want to make sure that we've developed administrative rules that, to the extent appropriate, hit on every one of these topics. So basically our contractor's punch list. If there's anything in there you don't understand, please let me know. I did organize them by which DSL division number we think will be addressing them, and which piece of legislation directed us to do that. On the next 2 pages, you'll remember I went around the room and had each of you speak to kind of what are your key concerns or your key needs. What do you or your constituents have to get out of this process? So that's just the next 2 pages. I just captured that from each of you. The really important item is on the next page. RAC member key issues distilled by DSL staff. So that's a list of 12 items. Does everybody see that? That's kind of a boil down of all the things you guys told me. I'm reviewing it. Chris and I saw kind of 12 common themes. So looking at this, I kind of view this as, at the end of our process, this will be our report card. So we'll have our punch list, things we got to get done, but then the bigger question is, did we do them in a way that address your key concerns? So hopefully by the end of the process, all of you will be able to say either, yeah, the way you guys have crafted the rules, it addresses these 12 key concerns, or at least at a minimum, you can say, there's nothing in the rules that undermines these 12 key issues and concerns. Is that fair?
I think it's great.
Okay. The last page is just the running list of parking lot issues. As I said, we'll continue to build that list over the next couple meetings, but also over time, hopefully, we'll take things off the parking lot list as we address them. So that's all I had on that. Any questions before we move on? Okay, so Chris, you'd put together a memo that starts to address some of those parking lot issues.
Yeah. So including parking lot issue number 1 is teed up in the memo that we prepared for the RAC today, along with some other things that were asked of the group, was sort of to put all the pertinent definitions in one spot that came out of both the legislation a couple years ago, the 2015 legislative session, and also what's already existing in the rules. So I tried to do that, and then also tee up a question for us to discuss as you guys would like as we move forward here today. So we put all these definitions in one spot. Ocean Renewable Energy Facility is now defined in statute after Senate Bill 319 passed. It means any energy conversion technology or device that is used as a necessary component of a research project, which we have defined in the Renewable Demonstration Project, or commercial operation to generate ocean renewable energy. And it's not, kind of lists the different aspects of a facility there. Commercial operation is also defined in statutes. Then we get to a couple things that I mentioned in the statute. Demonstration project and research project are both defined in the rule that's open and that we are considering here. Demonstration project is a limited duration, non-commercial activity authorized under temporary use authorization granted by the department to a person for the construction, installation, operation, or removal of an ocean energy facility on state-owned submersible lands to test the economic and or technological viability of establishing a commercial operation. Demonstration project may be temporarily connected to the grid for testing purposes without being a commercial operation. Being a commercial operation would kick it to an ocean energy facility lease as opposed to being eligible for a temporary use authorization. Then there's a definition for research project, which I just noticed is in the statute, so we were talking about research project earlier. Of course, research project is a very similar non-commercial activity granted to an educational and research institution for the placement of a device for testing. The purpose of that research project is to obtain scientific data related to ocean wave energy and or to test the technology used or functionality of an experimental ocean energy conversion device. Some of the differences between these two, demonstration project and research project in this rule, have been the application fee. It's a lesser application fee for a research project, $250 as opposed to $750. And there has been a term limit for research projects of 5 years, while there was not a limit on a term for the demonstration project for a commercial entity testing. Although now there is for pilot projects. And let me just finish this, Jason, and we'll get to your question. Pilot project was defined in Territorial Sea Plan as, I believe, having the same meaning as a demonstration project. With the exception of the pilot project, the Part 5 has some other sideboards, and one of them being that it has a term no longer than 5 years. So I can stop there, and if you want to discuss those definitions, it looks like, Jason, you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of expose a couple of issues. I think I'm not sure we'll answer them right now, but just get them on the table. So how would you guys think about this research project versus something that shows up under Section 120, 141, 125? How would you distinguish those two? They both appear to be limited to academic institutions or scientific endeavors, as opposed to, say, a wave energy company that wanted to put a scientific device out. Just by definition, it seems to exclude that. Is it truly limited to only academic institutions, for example?
So the research project, as defined and used, because it has been used in Division 140, have actually been for testing ocean energy conversion devices. So not testing just collecting scientific information in the territorial sea. An example was an OSU device that was tested in conjunction with Finavera, and that was an ocean energy conversion device.
And that,
So it's
that
still
showed up
limited
under
to
140,
It
not
came under
125.
140, yeah.
So would 125 ever, do you think 125 is ever going to apply to any of this? When will we ever need that?
Currently, and that's the second part of the memo. currently 125 is applied when people want to deploy scientific measuring devices, not an ocean energy conversion device, but acoustic Doppler profiler.
Not an ADCP.
No, that would be 125.
Oh.
Yeah, that would be just a scientific test. But we can get to that. Should we cover that then? Because that's one of the questions for the rack.
Yeah.
Right. So
the other issue is we're going to get there. It sounds like, so we'll just table that for right now. But the only other thing that I wanted to raise was probably channeling Rick Williams now. Demonstration projects. I mean, we generally think of a demonstration project as demonstrating the viability of the technology. Does it work? Does it flow? Does it create electricity? But the other aspect of that is demonstrating the economic viability of a project. So you would be selling power onto the grid. You would be analyzing the operations and maintenance costs. You'd be trying to get to what we refer to as the LCOE, levelized cost of energy, which is the lifetime cost of energy for a project. That's how retroactively you look back at a project or a technology and say, this is how much it costs to operate on a life cycle basis. Now you compare between other sources of energy like wind, onshore, offshore, natural gas, etc. So we want to get to that LCOE. The demonstration projects could go on for a demonstration project that was attempting to identify the cost of doing that project, creating electricity from that device, could take some time, and you would be selling the power commercially onto the grid. I think we would get into some gray area if we start saying, yeah, well, I'm selling onto the grid, but I'm only doing it to demonstrate the economic viability of the technology.
Okay.
I think that could be a problem. Does that make sense? I see blank stares. No.
Well, I have a little question. How do you get to the levelized cost of energy on a small demonstration project? You're
Only
not really
multiple years. You'd have to sort of back into, it'd be like a sample. If you did 5 years of a project, what would be a 20-year project?
Yeah.
Say, well, it costs this much for 5 years. We can probably get pretty close to what the 20 years is going to be.
But then you're still having all these costs associated with, say, one device, rather than saying, the efficiencies that come when you have 20 devices.
Agreed.
So,
Agreed.
Admittedly, you won't be able to say this is the levelized cost.
I agree 100%. LCOE, a real LCOE will not exist for marine energy for many, many years. There are multiple projects in the water, looking back at how much this stuff costs over a 20-year process. But DOE and the metrics that guide this conversation, especially at the federal level, is all about LCOE. If we can't talk in terms of LCOE, we're at a disadvantage. If we don't come up with some number that is equivalent to the LCOE as best as we can do. So DOE, for example, takes as their standard. Like, our job is to reduce the LCOE of wave energy from X to Y. Mm-hmm. What the heck is that? And we won't know for many years, but we are certainly going to do our best to try to answer the question. So, hence the 5-year demonstration project.
So Andy's up next.
Yeah, so I guess then I see the commercial activity part of this definition as being the crux of the issue, because you're raising the issue that they're actually going to want to be having the power go to the grid and to actually receive some sort of revenue from that device as it's connected while it's in a testing phase. So yeah, that's
not commercial. I mean, that would
okay.
make
So that is not what we're defining as commercial then.
No, I'm saying
that
your
is.
example that you just gave would be a commercial. If they're making money, it's commercial.
Well, I guess that's the issue Jason's raising. I think
says the demonstration project may be temporarily connected to the regional power grid for testing purposes without being a commercial operation. Mm-hmm. Presumably, you would be selling the power onto the grid. You're not giving the electricity away. And I don't know if we're going to answer it, but I do want to.
So I'm pointing out that that's the crux of the issue here. Is if you want to be able to actually do the LCOE, then you do need to have the flexibility to be able to generate some of the revenue that's a part of the
if you got blank stares
project.
or not responsive questions from us after you completed, it's sort of like I was waiting for the rest of the sentence, which should have been if companies are required to do this, then they're really disadvantaged somehow that they can't make that work. I mean, so can you can you further say we're being deprived of an opportunity? That's where I think you're going with this.
I don't
you
think
share
we're-
that with us later, or you think it should be let's get right to that. What do you want?
I don't see anything that we're necessarily being deprived. I'm just pointing out that I think there's internal inconsistency between in the demonstration project definition. If ultimately the most important thing about the project is whether it pencils out, will a company attempt to demonstrate that through a demonstration project, which could last for 5 years, for example? And I would see how it would be. You would get into a discussion then about whether or not that's really just a commercial project, couching it in terms of a demonstration project, thus qualifying for lower level permitting requirements, lower costs, lower oversight, for example.
And there could be those things under Part 5.
Agreed.
Some of those. Justin has a question.
Oh, I was just going to interject, so I was trying to abide by the rules and not be branded. Financial profit as a goal, I think Delia said this. I think that's the critical crux here, because anything that falls under demonstration project, financial profit is unlikely a goal. The word profit, I think, is the key part of that. Revenue is different than profit. And then I think the other just clarification on the concept of LCOE. So we use the word LCOE as an LCOE model. So you're gonna use a demonstration project to inform that model and make assumptions, validate some assumptions, whether it's on the energy side or any other component of it, and then you're going to use that model to then tell you where to go to the next scale device. So I don't think the LCOE at a demonstration project's ever going to be perfect and tell you if you made it or not. I think what you're doing in a demonstration project is informing the information that goes into that model per se, and it tells you what things you should be focusing on to get to the next step. So there's just a little cart before the horse there when we're talking LCOE around a demonstration project. It's not the end all by any means.
Doesn't this definition come from statute?
The definition of commercial operation does, and Ocean Renewable Energy Facility.
Not demonstration.
Not demonstration project. It's sort of linked to Part 5, and that's this definition are linked a little bit now. But this rule is open, and it's something we're looking at. Yes.
And you said pilot project has the same definition of demonstration project.
Yeah, that is in.
How is that determined?
It is. How is it determined that it's defined the same?
Yeah.
It says it.
Part 5 has a definition for demonstration project, and it refers back to Division 140.
So TSP says that pilot project has the definition of in OARs the demonstration project.
Pilot project on page 12.
But in that, I don't know, isn't the pilot project the first part of the multi-stage project that we almost all insisted that that's the right way to do a project? Do a pilot, make sure that it works, selling the power onto the grid. Hopefully you're making some money. Maybe it's not profitable at that point, but you're selling the power on the grid. It could qualify at some level as a demonstration project to your potential financiers and stakeholders, but it's also possibly the phase 1 of a 4-stage or 3-stage project, phase project.
Right, but if the definition of from Part 5 is the same as a demonstration project, then that sort of spins it back to a commercial activity.
As a non-commercial activity. Yeah.
It has to be a non-commercial activity.
Yeah.
Without changing the order.
Commercial operation, right?
Yeah. Now, so the only thing that strikes me as of concern there is if there's any limitation on whether or not a demonstration project is also a phase 1 pilot project could be extended. Can it stay in the water after it's done being a demonstration project?
Well, in that case, Part 5, we have to take a look back at Part 5, because besides saying that they're defined, they sort of are linked, Part 5 goes on to say a lot more about what pilot project includes, and I thought it said, let's take a quick look at Part 5.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we have...
Hey, Chris, this is Walter on the phone. Can I say something?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a kind of an issue with this demonstration and pilot project. If it's going to be either part of a phase 1 of any type of build out, what would be the permitting would the demonstration project be done under a different permitting project than if they were to expand it?
At the risk of jumping ahead a little bit, from the removal fill permitting perspective, we're going to be talking about research and demonstration projects and an expedited regulatory permit process for them. If we're talking about projects that segue into full commercial operation, that becomes a different animal that would need a different form of regulatory approval.
Well, Jason was talking about this, a pilot or a demonstration project being phase one of a potential commercial development. How does that not become a commercial development to begin with if their plan is to possibly have that be first phase of a larger project?
So I think we have a couple. I found something. I can let Andy go and then Anno, and I'll see if I can add anything.
Yeah, under Territorial C Part 5, under the pilot project section, there's 2 bullet points that relate to this discussion. One of them is E. It talks about the fact that the pilot project will have a term of 5 years unless some other condition occurs or unacceptable level of environmental effect occurs. I think that would then go into decommissioning. And then under bullet F here, it says that it will require decommissioning unless an authorization for a commercial renewable energy facility is sought. So I think there's your connection to the phased approach.
And I will add a little bit. And then on the next page says a pilot project that provides the necessary and sufficient information may become a phased development. So there's a link to it becoming a phased development. Going back to the rules we're looking at, a demonstration project is and this is something we talked about in the memo, is the one authorization that allows you that first right to apply for a lease. So it's sort of expected if you're investing in testing an actual device at that location, and things go well, you'd have the first crack at applying for an ocean energy facility lease at that spot. And I don't want to lose this point. The one thing I think we're trying to look at, it's all started with the definition of demonstration project. And I'm trying to distill, before we get too lost, I'm going to Anno and then Scott. The question is still about that definition. Is there some clarity that the RAC would want to add to the definition that would say you could sell power as long as we're profitable or something along those lines, or it wasn't? I think it says right in there that demonstration project may be temporarily connected to the grid for testing purposes without being a commercial operation.
Mm-hmm.
And commercial operation
Has financial profit as a goal.
Has financial profit as a goal. So do you think there's some, does the RAC think that the definition
I
needs to
don't.
be clarified?
I think the less said is better. If it's already in the rules, don't add more verbiage.
Will you say it again? I didn't hear you.
I think, I don't think it needs more clarity. If it's not, if it's already clear in the rules, I'd say don't add more verbiage to confuse it more.
I think it depends on whether or not,
Well,
I'll go after them.
it's because I jumped in to ask the question. And I'll get to
I was just answering his
Right.
question, sorry.
You want to
I just think it depends on how much flexibility for interpretation DSL wants on a project-by-project basis.
Okay.
As it is right now, you would be putting DSL in a position where you would have to make that clarification on a project-by-project basis. That's my interpretation.
Yeah, and I would imagine DSL would rely on whatever documentation is provided to the financiers. If it's billed to the financiers as a profit-making venture, then it's not. It fails the definition of demonstration project.
Commissioner Husing. Excuse me.
I think I just got a promotion on the spot. Thank you. Let the record show that Anno Husing used his tense.
Yeah.
And I think the perils of being too attached to this is that one does lose, in a group of this size, we lose the thread of conversation. So, I mean, that's just my editorial comment. I'm not running the meeting. Just in response to what we've been talking about, let's go back and just for a minute try to understand what sort of the kind of the policy elements of it. So let's put aside this OAR or this statute, whatever like that. from the perspective of some communities, that there is a clear desire to help expedite and put as few obstacles between legitimate testing and demonstration projects that are of limited duration, limited scale, that really get information. It's one of the reasons the communities have embraced PMEC type model, is that we have a place that we can go to that's already been vetted in terms of its impacts on the environment and to the communities where these devices should go. And that as much of this accelerated, expedited, however, streamlining, all these buzzwords that one wants to put, presume it like a general authorization. Why wouldn't we encourage that kind of fast tracking? Because the hard questions have been asked about the location, the impacts to the communities, and we're in effect corralling different kinds of potential impacts on the environment and other users of the ocean to those places. And so I think some of the language and the direction that inspired the kind of language we're talking about and the university side of things was that's exactly what that would accomplish, is that we're going to really let these areas go in terms of its public review and all these other kinds of things, because we've made a lot of those upfront tough calls up to this is where we really want to promote this kind of activity, which is kind of like in retrospect maybe RILEA should have that kind of if in fact every time someone wants to test a shallow water device that happens at RILEA, maybe there ought to be more of an official recognition that that's what RILEA is using. I'm just using it as a case in point. So as we try to unravel what OAR and what procedural something or other, or whether it's commercial or not, I mean, obviously everybody's in this to make money. If they're a company, whether they get bought or this or that. So it's true, those kind of definitions sometimes can be unhelpful in terms of trying to cull out what everybody can seemingly be for versus it having a commercial slant or something to it. So I just wanted to offer that sort of perspective that there's some stuff there that is anchored to the university approach for those reasons, because the comfort level from everybody is really high if we go do it in those areas, versus this sort of ad hoc, I want to do something here, like OPT did with, first it's a 10 buoy project, then all of a sudden it's going to be 200 buoys, and no, never mind, it's going to be this other footprint. And we got back and forth, and we whipsawed that community, and we had so many conflicting messages, and that, this so-called demonstration project, which never happened, of course, it would have been 10 buoys, was, of course, meant to be the build-out of a much larger facility. And that's the kind of stuff that we have to strive to get out from under that kind of activity, where something's being postured as one thing, and we all know it's something else. Thank you.
Scott?
Well, just I want to get clarity to keep the show on, that we can not lose the train of thought. When Andy talked about a pilot converting to a commercial operation, what I wanted to ask is it clear then that that would trigger a separate permitting process? Say they get to year 4 of a of a pilot project, and they want to keep it in place, turn it into a commercial project, they would require a whole new permitting process going forward as a commercial. Is that correct?
That's how I read this bullet F on part 5.
With the caveat,
As far as the language that, in my mind, it's kind of sloppy language when this profit as a goal, because it's pretty easy to just say, well, we're not looking for profit as a goal. We're just trying to test this, but we have to do this and that. Hook it to the grid and check. It seems like it's sloppy language, and that's something that this body ought to try to clarify, so we don't end up with this loose, debatable language that's subject to interpretation down the road. We ought to solve it here and now, rather than leave that for debate at a later time.
I agree. It seems to me I haven't quite put my hand on it, but it's about to start drawing a Venn diagram to see where they overlap. Like, that's what I wanted. But I think there's something to that. A demonstration project, irrespective of whether the company wants to make money, of course the company wants to make money off of it. and they might not even know whether they're going to make money off of it until they're 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. If they don't turn a profit for the first 4 years, but do something to improve it in the 5th year, all of a sudden they're making a profit. It's no longer a demonstration project. I think there's no reason to get into those conversations. Demonstration project, insofar as it's of a temporary nature, minimal impact on the environment, not, I'm not sure where else can go, but a handful of characteristics like that, it's a demonstration project. And if they ever want to parlay that into a permanent commercial project, then you go through the permitting process to be able to keep your device in the water.
Yep. I agree. And I think that the way the pilot project is defined in Part 5
It says
set
that.
up that
Yeah.
way. You
It
get
says
some
that right
breaks
there.
for doing a pilot project as well. You get some breaks from needing to fill out at least the operation plan portion of territorials. But the expectation is that if something bad happens, you pull it out, right? There's no really adaptive management. Something happens, you take it out, and that would be something to consider for the regulatory permit too.
So just, again, following Jason's thread, it's like, that's all fine and good, but let's call a spade a spade. If we are now going to depart from identified test areas that have been fully vetted with the communities, and we agree probably have least environmental impacts, and we're doing something else, and it's a demo project, it still occupies ocean space for 5 years, which for impacted communities is a long time. And on top of that, it's done explicitly with the hope that it expands in that location. And therefore, if we do that, I think it's entirely responsible for the state of Oregon to not streamline that. If it's going to be that, then it needs to have all of the kind of public review, high levels of scrutiny, so that it can be completely vetted, so there is no sort of, where we're not having to rely on companies saying, oh no, we're not really interested in that, and have to find out because we're reading an 800-page document that buried in there on a FERC filing, all of a sudden, yes, they do have those plans. I don't want to relive that era at all, not for a minute. And so, because I'm not sure who's going to read those 800-page documents. Therefore, having a very transparent, clear set of understandings going into it, I think should be good for the industry, should be good for the communities, because we're not playing the shell game that marked so much of what we were doing in the past.
Delia was next, I think.
So we may have cut you off, Chris. You may have been getting to this in your description, I suspect. But in my reviewing, what I found is that there are some sideboards provided in Part 5, Section F, when it talks about the pilot project, and that could be used to fulfill the inventory requirements under B4. But that wouldn't, there's nothing in here that says whether that would or wouldn't then initiate a permitting process for the commercial part, the commercial phase. And so I think what I'm hearing is that there's parties that feel like that needs to be spelled out in rule when we bring the RFP process in and couple it more directly with the proprietary process. It should be described that you go through the pilot in order to get the information you need to fill the inventory, and then that inventory helps you flesh out your application. And that application would include public review. That's my interpretation. I think other people have that interpretation of Part 5 too, but maybe we can't rely on it completely. Maybe that needs to be spelled out that because Kirk, I heard you say that there's a new process for the commercial build out, right?
No.
For the RFP?
Yeah, so let me clarify that. So in fact, so what you said was right. I'm just going to sort of put it in my regulatory words.
Yeah.
For the demonstration 5-year duration type project, we're going to be talking shortly about a general authorization or general permit that would provide expedited process. That permit would only be good for 5 years. At the end of 5 years, one of two things happens. Either that project's out of the water, or it has secured an individual permit for bigger, longer duration whatever the case may be. So at that point, it would need to secure what we call our individual permit process, which I do have to point out is a discretionary permit process. Just because you got an authorization for the demonstration project is not a guarantee that you get a permit for the full build-out. It gets its own evaluation, public review processes.
Okay. And
Does that help?
is that already laid out in rule?
So by default, it's not laid out in rule yet, but it's laid out in statute because Senate Bill 319 says there's a 0 cubic yard threshold for ocean renewable energy projects. So as it stands right now today, research, demonstration, or full commercial project has to get an individual permit. It's only by the work we do here that we might come up with a more streamlined process for research and demonstrations.
Okay. So then I guess it's just important that there not be a loophole there where having, if we agree to a general permit and the sideboard's on a general permit, and get to a place where that could have some first right to apply, that doesn't supersede the need for a public process, due process for the individual permit that would be appropriate for the commercial build-out.
Correct. And to be clear, so the first right to apply is for DSL's proprietary process, which is separate and distinct. We make our own decisions on the regulatory side of the house from whatever Chris might issue as a proprietary first right.
And just to add on that, for a demonstration project, there's still currently a public review process. In fact, you'll still be convening JART. The one thing I saw that was streamlined in Part 5 is that you don't need to fulfill the requirements of Section D of Part 5, which is the operation plan, although you do have to develop a work plan that has some basic information in it. So there would still be a JART in a public review process currently through the proprietary authorization.
Well, quite apart from the fill permit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Otto first, and then Joanne first.
Oh.
Yeah, she.
I know. And then Delia.
I just want to echo what Commissioner Husing was saying about the
Secretary of State
about the fact that the TSP has already identified areas that are appropriate, and so that if you do not have a streamlined process for those areas, then you're wading in redundant and useless rules and verbiage. So I think that if we do not come up with a streamlined process for demonstration and pilot projects as part of this rule, we're spinning our wheels and wasting our time. And I think it's in direct opposition to the intent of providing for ocean renewable energy in the state. The area that these pilot projects or even potentially expanded pilot projects in the appropriate designated areas could expand to is still less than 3% of the entire coastline of Oregon. So I'm focused on that as a planner. I'm focused on balanced resourcing. I'm focused on balancing our Earth's natural resources for all users, not just select few industries. Otherwise, we don't expand as a. I'm getting big picture here. We don't expand as a, in progress as a people, as a civilization, as anything. You can't just focus on one industry. We've seen that happen in forestry. You have to be open to all different industries, but responsibly. I'm all about protecting our natural resources. So I just wanted to echo that. If we do not come up with a demonstration or some kind of streamlined process, our time here is wasted, in my opinion.
Editorial comment real quick. The good news, Joanne, is you're going to know by the end of today.
Great.
Today if we are or aren't, because 319 empowers you guys to advise us on exactly that question. Who's next? Anna.
Director is
Sorry?
is the appropriate. People care to understand my current title as director.
This is Walter. Can I ask a clarifying question, please?
Go ahead, Walter.
Yeah. Is there any language saying, can you apply for an individual permit concurrently while they're doing their demonstration project? Or do you have to wait until the demonstration project 5-year timeline is over to apply for an individual permit?
Kirk Jarvie here. So off the top of my head, I think a person would be free at any time to pursue a larger build-out of their project and apply for an individual permit at whatever point they're at in the demonstration phase.
Okay, I would have a little bit of a problem with that, just with a demonstration project being in the water with an individual permit also being applied for at the same time. That would kind of take the spirit of a demonstration project out in my eyes.
Okay. Well, let's be sure we come back to that when we start talking about specifically which regulatory process we're going to use and see if we can address that. Anna, what was your next?
Yes. I want to make sure that, Joanne, that we are indeed in agreement. So, to the extent that, let me try to capture what I think you said and what I sort of meant by what I said, is that when you talk about the territorial sea plan having daylighted only a couple % of the territorial sea for this kind of activity, a REFSA site, right? That's what we're talking about. From the perspective of many people in the communities, the territorial sea plan is far too generous toward potential energy development, because RUMAs and RUCAs, almost 90% of the territorial sea, is subject to applications from energy companies to the Department of State Lands. And at that point, from the community perspective that might be impacted by this, our only backstop is the JART, which is one of the reasons we care very deeply that the JART is a meaningful, substantive group. And so if I were to agree with what I think you were saying, even though I am not happy at all with 3 out of 4 of the REFSA sites, I think they're in violation of the spirit and the letter of Goal 19. And that's one of the reasons there has been litigation over the process and what the outcome of the territorial sea plan, which had some, looking at my colleague Andy, which had some great work done. So if I'm critical about the territorial sea plan, there was an awful lot of terrific stuff that was done that I think we can still build upon. But if indeed you're saying that maybe these demo projects that can morph into something much bigger later on, which is what we're trying to get at, should be confined to REFSA sites, then maybe indeed we do have some sense of agreement.
Well, that's what
because
I'm
that
thinking.
really substantially narrows the amazing amount of real estate, the terrific, stupendous amount of sites in the existing territorial sea plan that are subject to someone applying for these permits, individual permits or what, and going forward. That can balloon into something else.
Sure, I was thinking of the RESPA sites as appropriate for demonstration and streamlining. But that's my opinion.
Yeah.
And that's what I think should be streamlined, because you've already identified these areas as appropriate with the minimal impacts to other activities and stuff. So
that was at least the intent. Some of it, if you look at it, that was the intent. I'm not sure that was the outcome of the territorial sea plan, because we can disagree about the actual REFSA location.
But if you look at
the idea,
yes, that's true. But if you look at significant impacts and you say to any reasonable person that's representing only less than 3% of the whole territorial sea, it's hard to show a significant impact unless it's an oil rig leaking over the rest of the, so that's my point. And yes, I was talking about streamlining for those areas, exactly. But that's my opinion, not the industry's, as a planner.
So I have to point out, so we're definitely drifting into the conversation that's coming up regarding the general authorization, general permit, and what are the sideboards. So let's be careful we don't go too far down that path. But I want to make sure we're all at a comfortable place with Chris's memo regarding the definitions. And I think Chris, you had posed some questions.
I did. We didn't even get to that section yet.
Yeah.
Did you answer them already?
No.
Hi, Kirk. Rick Williams. I'm on the line.
Thank you, Rick. Welcome.
So I had two quick things. One, you did have a question on the first page. Should DSL allow some type of first right to apply. Are we go-
Is ignoring
Oh,
the
I'm
tense
sorry.
now?
I thought it was up
Mhm.
there. For you. Sorry.
Do you have a question? I do want to get to the rest of the memo, which we'll get to your question.
I just wanted to bring up a general point. I'm trying to respect your agenda and when we talk about proprietary and when we talk about regulatory. But I think it's really confusing for those of us who don't do that all the time to understand the timeframes and the whether we're expediting, if what we're looking at is a mechanism for expediting. If we expedite the remove and fill process and the proprietary process for the same application or the same project still has to have a JART, have we really expedited anything?
That's a great question.
So, so I just want your help kind of coupling those two and figuring out how they're going to work together, because if we're as a group only looking at one and then the other,
Right.
I don't think we're actually doing anybody any service in terms of expediting.
So I'll have a proposal on that when we kick off that discussion of GA versus GP.
Thank you.
So, no, that's great. So quick, let's just run through this real quick because it came up as one of our parking lot issues. Scientific experiments where there's not an ocean energy conversion device being tested. For just putting out scientific measuring devices, the department typically authorizes those as under special use rules. Shorter than a year, we'll usually grant a short-term access authorization for those. I have some examples of projects in the territorial sea that we have issued short-term access authorizations for. One, collection of sediment samples by University of California, Santa Cruz, go banana slugs. Another was a deployment of acoustic recorders off of Douglas County by Reedsport OPT. It was outside, and they put those outside of their demonstration project area to do some measurements, so that came under short-term access authorization. We've also given short-term access authorizations to ODF&W for deploying acoustic receivers for their green sturgeon surveys off of Douglas County. So those are under a different set of rules. We've also given some special use licenses and leases for long-term scientific projects. One is the establishment of NIMRIC. NIMRIC as a station is a special use lease. Devices that go in there will get temporary use authorizations as demonstration projects and have to meet all the financial assurance requirements that are in statute. Another was a more long-term deployment of acoustic seafloor hydrophone mooring platforms off of Clatsop County by Oregon State University. I think there's some utility to authorizing just scientific measuring devices for any applicant through this. I think it just goes through part 2. I think it's a much streamlined process, especially if you're not actually going to test a device. You don't have to convene a JART, and you can collect your info and go upon your way.
We have to trust your department that's going to get it right in terms of conflicts with others.
Yes, but there's still a process. There's just not a Part 5 process for us administering those applications and permits, whichever side of the house that those come under. And then lastly, because it was teed up, this has come up once before. We had a real life example with Aquamarine Power when they came to Oregon in 2010. They wanted to deploy quite a few acoustic Doppler current profilers off of 3 counties, and they wanted them authorized under the ocean energy rules because they wanted that first right to apply for a lease. When we did not agree to process those under 140 because there wasn't an ocean energy conversion device that was being deployed. We did offer to authorize the deployment of those devices under 125, which would allow them to collect their data, but would not have had a first right to apply. That's clarified, and it should be a rationale that was both in the memo and in the letter that was sent to Aquamarine by Director Soliday. But this all leads to the question that I would like RAC input on, and that is, should we allow some sort of first right to apply to a commercial entity if they want to deploy scientific data collection devices as opposed to an actual ocean energy conversion device? And if so, what would be those sort of sideboards?
It's tough.
Jason and Scott.
Scott was up.
Scott then Jason.
And I don't want to answer your question because that I put my 10 up before that.
Okay.
I think Ono hit it quite well when he said we have to trust the agency in these situations, and I don't mean any disrespect to the agency, but I don't think that often the agencies understand the impacts of some of these, what would seem to be very minor installations. And I think back to the Principal Power project where they put some kind of a current meter or something in the water. This is in federal waters, of course. But they did it with, and it was just, Dad, go do it. And in fact, what happened was they used acoustic releases for those things and left equipment on the seafloor. Not equipment, but railroad wheel anchors, moorings right in the fishing ground. So now Principal Power's gone. That project's not going to happen. But that ground is fouled for a probably a half-mile diameter area around that point where those anchors were abandoned because they use steel wheels that are going to be a problem for trawlers that fish that area. So I think we have to make sure that if this kind of an authorization is allowed for science equipment, there has to be a requirement that that whatever goes in comes back out, that there's no anchors, no acoustic releases used to leave stuff on the seabed, or that it's done in a way that doesn't foul the grounds.
Great. Thank you.
Just 2 or 3 comments here. First of all, I think that the standards that would be applied for research related to marine energy ought to be the same standards that apply to any other form of research. So they're not allowed to leave stuff in the water for if NOAA comes in and wants to study X, their stuff comes out, then ours comes out. If theirs gets to stay in, ours gets to stay in. Secondly, I question whether a Section 125 lease could ever apply to an aquamarine or any other private company, because the definition of research project says that it only applies to educational/research institutions. So I don't know how they would ever have qualified for a 125.
Maybe they shouldn't.
Well, they did.
But I also think that the question that they raised at the time was entirely appropriate. They were going to invest, a lot of money, probably 7 figures plus, to do those research projects over a period of time, and they wanted to ensure that if one of those areas turned out to have excellent resource and met their other basic requirements, that they would actually be able to be the first in time to apply for the permits to develop that site. 125 doesn't provide that for you. I think that if we're correct that the research project for 125 only applies to an academic institution or a research institution like a National Renewable Energy Lab or a NOAA or whatever, then we may consider adopting some language that would apply to a Section 140 lease that would replicate at some level what you would get from a research lease.
Okay.
A special use authorization under 140.
You would find people with very different opinions about that.
Oh, I'm sure.
So you lost me on your first question. I didn't catch, but I see what you're saying. You are looking for some sort of first right to apply for deployment of.
Right. So they're not going to. If I'm correct that a Section 125 special use authorization would not apply for a private company that came along and wanted to deploy ADCPs, for example. If that's true, then we're taking that off the table for private companies. We're only talking about Section 140, either a temporary use authorization or a lease.
So I don't. So yeah, that's where
You're not buying that. So you think that a private company could qualify for a 125 special use authorization?
Yeah, why not? For just
Because
deploying acoustic Doppler profilers or anything
It's not
else?
it's not a research project under the definition.
Not connected up to
Right.
to the slippery slope of
A research project
First
is for
Amendment Act.
deploying, is under 140, right? Research project, you're talking about the definitions earlier. in
Oh,
the memo.
research is only for 140.
That definition is from 140, yep.
Yeah.
And so that would be testing a wave energy device for that OSU or U of O or Cal Poly San Luis Obispo or somebody else wants to go test out there. That would be a research project, not a demonstration project.
So an aquamarine could qualify for 125 special use authorization.
That's what we asked. That's what we told them.
But
we
they
would
don't
give
get a
them.
first in time right to
Bingo.
apply.
Yes.
Could we adopt language that would insert them under the research project 140 so they could secure first-time rights to
Research
That's
projects
it.
under 140 don't get a first right to apply.
And that would be vigorously opposed.
Why?
Why? Because, again, given the nature of the territorial sea plan, how wide open currently, if Joanne and I had our way, we would, if in fact we had some advanced vetting of, so I don't care if they go into places that are thoroughly vetted and everything like that, and then there could be some potential build-outs and everything like that, those kind of connections that I would understand a company would like. I understand that a company would like that, Jason. But
company demands that for investment in the state. It's the same for our industry as any other industry. If they're going to go analyze a piece of property and spend money on environmental tests, make sure that the property is clean, it's not brownfield, et cetera, they're going to want to have to deal with the local organization or government that controls that property. That if it passes their muster, their test, and they're going to be able to be the first one in time to. Because what would they like to do? Have another company come in after they've spent the money on ensuring that's an appropriate site, and then just get pushed completely out of the process? That would be unfair, and it wouldn't apply to their industry any more than it would apply to
what's
our
unfair is 90% of the territorial sea at this point is open for
industry.
development.
That's the discussion of the territorial sea plan until. Panel of judges changes that.
We're not
having
pretend that they
conversation.
can be divorced from each other.
I'm not
in
having
some
a
other
conversation about
some other
territorial sea
setting.
plan
But I think
process in this
we got
process.
back around. So
It's not on the
we got
table
back
here.
to the question that I posed. I think here was so. Do we have a good understanding? Research project under 140 would be for like Oregon State testing a device, not acoustic Doppler profilers. Demonstration project, which has the first right to apply, would be OPT or Finavera testing a device under temporary use authorization. That's the only thing that has the first right to apply currently. So the other part to this, which I brought to try to bring in with the memo, would be testing scientific, just collecting data or deployment of scientific collection devices, whatever they may be. I don't know what they might be.
And that's under Division 125.
That's under 125.
And there's no first right of refusal, first right under 125.
Yes.
But you can. I'm reading this memo and it's saying that they didn't get authorized to put in the tests.
Yeah, they didn't continue on after they
chose not to
because
invest
they couldn't
get the
first right. I
Yes.
see. I
So
see.
the question
that's
is-
the issue.
And I think you got to it. Does the RAC want to consider allowing some sort of first right?
It sounds
to
like that would be
apply?
under 125, though.
Under like so if a commercial operation applies to deploy acoustic Doppler current profilers, so this is a question we can look at in this rule. That's why I'm asking you guys this. Under 125, because we could write something in there. It says that if they do and they're holder in good standing or something along those lines, should they be allotted some sort of first right to apply for doing that sort of research?
And what does that mean?
And what does that mean?
You know, Jason, I'm not sure that your characterization that somehow someone's not going to invest in characterizing a resource unless they're locked in to be the ones to get it is entirely accurate.
I'm sure it's not 100% accurate, but it certainly would be the
I-
starting
and I-
point for a conversation.
Well, and for some of us, given the scale of the territorial sea plan, it allows for development, which you don't want to talk about, in this setting or others probably, makes something like that a non-starter for some of us in terms of...
Hey, Kirk and Chris, can I have a input?
Just a sec. Let's have Anno finish his point here.
No, Rick always adds very knowledgeable stuff. I'd love to hear him respond because I do want to know what he thinks about that.
Go ahead, Rick.
Go ahead, Rick.
Thank you. So deployment of oceanographic instrumentation costs money, and it generates data. The data with processing generates information and knowledge.
Which benefits the state.
We want to encourage people to deploy instrumentation as long as that data is in the public domain and the results are published. So if a company or a research organization is going to deploy, and if the information is not going to be close held, it's going to be in the public domain, then it would be reasonable to encourage that behavior by providing a first right to a deployment on that site. And that's how we get more information about the territorial sea than we would through the normal grant process and government funding of research.
Very good point.
Thank you.
And just thank you for that, Rick, and it's Anno again. But would it be advantageous and promote research if so much of our dealings with folks that want to do stuff offshore claim non-disclosure agreements and proprietary knowledge? Would it be an incentive for that community to not require public disclosure of some of that information that would be deemed proprietary, and then we wouldn't have to worry about someone benefiting, some other company betting from the proprietary information effective of a company that did go ahead and put the work and put the research out there.
Well, that's an equally valid approach. I'm not sure that it benefits the overall public or the companies or the industry or the community at large to have data collected and not reported. I think it's kind of the Oregon way to, if you're going to deploy instrumentation, then you publish the data, and that's why I think there ought to be some consideration if you're going to suffer the expense of deploying the instrumentation and there's an opportunity to develop there, you ought to get the first right.
Julie, listening.
So Delia, is that?
So did you say, Chris, that there is already a first right to apply under 140?
There is a first right to apply under 140. Yes.
And where is that?
That is, we're going to find it. I think it is early on in 140, OAR 140. I believe it says policies.
Okay.
It might be OAR 140. This is for the record, and then you guys can look at it at your leisure. 140, 141, 140, 00.
30 policies.
No, it's in purpose and applicability, 0010 sub 7. Except for education/research institutions conducting a research project, the holder of a temporary use authorization to conduct a demonstration project shall be given a first right to apply for an ocean renewable energy facility lease for the authorized area specified in the temporary use authorization. If such first right to apply is not exercised within 30 days of the expiration date of the temporary use authorization, the first right to apply shall expire.
Terrific. Okay, so my point, I'll be quick, is that maybe 140 is the better place to look than 125 if we could redefine demonstration project to accommodate something. I think this came up at the last meeting too. So if that's already in there, that might be a better approach than redefining more in 125. Unless ESL has a specific purpose in mind for looking at 125.
We don't, but I was thinking we would just maybe even add something to that. In 140 that says a special use license for the deployment of scientific instrumentation under 125 shall also be given some sort of first right to apply. And then no one said it yet, except for the legal students from U of O. There's actually no other meat and potatoes to what a first right to apply provides you in 140. So I guess that also, if you guys wanted us to look at that, it'd probably be worth fleshing out what do you get.
So
we're going to have to start wrapping up. I do want to hear yes or no on
a real quick comment. To me, I would have to stare at this a little bit longer to decide whether or not a 140 approach or 125 approach is better. And for me, it's 6 one, half dozen the other. I think there's something to it if you want to incentivize someone to make the investment in that kind of project. It's the wave energy equivalent of a Met tower for wind, where they routinely put something out into space for a year or more to try to understand what the resource is before they justify making any additional investments there. It makes sense that they would have the ability to move forward the first time. Rick's point, real quick, on the information. I mean, in general, I agree, especially if you were using OET dollars for the investment in the study. The information should be completely public, and we made sure that was the case. I'm not sure that's appropriate for all kinds of projects. Maybe, I don't know if Met Tower, for example, information in the wind industry is proprietary, or if that's something that goes into a national database. I'm not a clue. But I could see how it might have value to a company, and they would not want to make that public.
when it could, it might be, and it's really worth it. It's a pretty darn good analogy for this, the Met Tower thing, because before you're going to do the full deployment, you're characterizing the resource. So it is probably a very fertile ground to look for precedents and how it rolls out in that industry. And not being an expert on terrestrial wind, hard to know exactly how that plays. It maybe it has different rules, but it's worth looking into.
Chris,
I
do you
mean,
know offhand,
I know
Met
national-
Towers on state-owned land, did we give them a first right?
Yes, I believe they do. So other upland renewable energy, geothermal, because we own a lot of upland, wind energy, are covered under OER 125, special use rules, and I believe that there is a first right to apply for those similar renewable energy projects for the deployment of things like Met Towers.
So, but that begs the question, though. I mean, so what if I'm a company and let's say it's terrestrial lease for a wind project on state lands, all right? And so I've got it, and at that point, there's been a vetting, I suppose, within your agency that area is appropriate for. There's been commentary from ODFW on the obvious avian impacts and all these other kinds of things. So all that's been I would think that there is one would hope, and in the past I've been rather surprised at how little advanced planning there is in terms of these kinds of things, that you would front load the planning side like we tried to do, at least in theory, with the Territorial Sea Plan. And so that therefore by the time you get ready to give a private sector company a lease for a site on public lands, that the environmental impacts on such and such, ODFW impact, all those kind of things are factored in. And then, at that point, this relates to the theme we've had all along here. After proper vetting, expedited preference treatments will start to make sense and don't violate the other public interests. Without a lot of upfront vetting, that's where some of us believe that might not necessarily be in the public interest, because you set into motion a chain of events that's very hard to stop later on. And when we've seen major conflicts with offshore oil and gas development in the United States, there's been litigation for decades now over this. We see development interests piecemealing this kind of development with the first, it's just this, or it's just research, or it's just that, and then in effect it cascades into full development. And so again, for some of us, since it's 2016 and not 1916, this kind of upfront vetting, citing, it's real. Just to close this long torturous comment, the more vetting up front, the less heartburn about expedited preferential treatment. And it's just the opposite. If there's none of that stuff up front in an open landscape, one would want to have the least amount of preferential treatment expedited, that there are bright lines between each of these sections, and that they're really not just lines on paper. They're going to be substantive reviews of you don't get to go to the next step because of what we've learned. So again, I offered up the idea that some of the companies might want to retain some of that information privately for that reason too. It's like, because I think we're in the right place at the right scale. I think we're all in favor of inducing and trying to get this kind of activity going. It's just where we depart is where and at what scale, and what are the necessary consequences of doing that.
Scott, and then Ian.
I would hope that first rights to an area would simply mean that and nothing more, that you don't get any pass on anything. If you put a Met Tower up or a current profiler or whatever the device is in an area, as I read in Delia's copy, you have to identify the footprint that you're asking for. So if you're going to ask for a footprint of 2 miles by 2 miles, because somewhere in that box you're going to put a current profiler that will eventually allow you to potentially get this first right for the device, that should give you absolutely no pass to other than first right. You have first right before anybody else. Doesn't give you any kind of a pass on any of the other requirements and the vetting that needs to take place.
I agree with that 100%.
And I think that'd be some of the questions you want to ask is, well, should you get a first right for how big of an area as well? That's part of the sideboard questions. We asked if you choose to say, as a group, recommend that, yeah, you should, if the group recommends that we should take a look at expanding who and when you get a first right to apply and flush out what we need to flush out what that means and what the sideboards would be for that.
We got cards sprawling everywhere.
And
Yes. And then we'll try to wrap it up. So Andy, is it Delia and then Anna? Or is it Anna?
Anna.
And Delia. Gotta be faster next
Yeah,
time.
so I agree with Scott and what all of you have said. Part 5 is still going to apply when they apply for a commercial lease. It's not like any of the standards that we wrote in Part 5 are going to go away. So I do believe that for companies' purposes in terms of investment, a first right of to apply would be appropriate. I do have a little bit of heartburn in terms of how we define the area that an individual is talking about, because a lot of these devices can measure very large distances, and we don't want somebody to be able to put out 11 or 12 of these things and then have the whole territorial sea locked up, right? As Aquamarine aptly pointed out, someone might try and do. So I think that we would want to clarify how we would want that area to be described, scoped.
What they're getting
Yeah,
first
exactly.
right to.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, like just because you put out a profiler in one place doesn't mean you get 5 miles in a radius around it. So I think that we as a group should think about how we would like to have that information come to us if it is part of this.
Thank you.
Following that thread, I'm no fan of the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, but there is something that, and before I talk about what I kind of like about that act, one of the things that we might want to borrow for this purpose, but the bottom line is that let's go right to that. Is that if I apply under the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act to the Department of Interior for a piece of real estate out there, they have a determination of no competitive interest process, right? So right now, and I think this is a really fundamental flaw in what's going on with your agency that needs to be modernized and updated, is that I can form a company tomorrow, apply for something, start engaging the agencies, tie things up. We all know site banking, all these kinds of things. So that kind of stuff is not helpful. So even legitimate companies or companies that are really trying to game something. But the way to when you have strong due diligence requirements, and when you have the potential is, again, with an unsolicited request under the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, there's an immediate, the Department of Interior has to stop and see if anybody else is interested in this real estate. And this idea that someone's going to unilaterally go out there and start doing the kinds of things Andy is saying, or something, let's say, much more modest, begs the question, wait a minute, shouldn't we have a timeout, see who else is interested? One of the challenges I think that we face, and that all of us face in this effort, is we have an industry that really doesn't hardly exist. It's in an R&D phase. So, but shouldn't we be thinking in terms of creating a framework where there's a mature industry, where there are a number of companies that might want to competitively compete for a particular piece of real estate? And so that's kind of the dilemma that some of the parts of the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act that actually kind of make. I don't like unsolicited requests. I think that's an anachronism that we allow that on the Outer Continental Shelf. I feel strongly about that. As someone who's been around that act for decades, and there are a lot of people that think that ought to be changed. I don't know if anybody has the horsepower to think about doing that, but I think that needs to be changed. But we have an opportunity to take a fresh look here at Oregon, look at this and kind of say, how do we handle that? That's a really important. I like Andy's point about what in fact are we allowing to go forward. And again, but it's a real challenge for all of us to try to birth a framework that we can all agree on
that's more or less geared to a mature industry where they're flying elbows of competitive interest versus an industry that really doesn't exist, that's just, kind of crawling out of the mud, trying to get a little foothold somewhere and doing some testing. And worrying about some commercial development that's very unlikely to happen anyway. But I think it's a good question for all of us as a policy matter. What kind of system do we put in place? A pre-Cambrian thing, or something that's actually blowing and going and something that some people in this room are anxious to try to facilitate as a mature industry.
Thank you. Delia.
So I see this as less of a fish and wildlife issue, but to keep it from becoming a fish and wildlife issue, I think it would be important to us. I think we could get on board with some sort of a first right. It's been employed for other industries, for other kinds of projects. It would need two specific kinds of sideboards. One, the area threshold. I strongly agree with what Andy was saying about that. We want to keep something, if you have a demonstration project that's just a postage stamp, we want to keep that from giving you the first right to apply for several square miles, at least in policy. Even if it effectively had that result, at least in policy, I think it should be very clear that one translates to one, not one translates to five. And some sort of expiration duration as well, so that there's sort of a use it or lose it in the policy. So, while it's important, I think, to honor the investment that developers have made, it's also important to honor the potential investment that could come from other sectors or other developers. So let's not lock a place down. And that's already in 140. You have to use it you have to apply within 30 days of the expiration date of the temporary use authorization. And that's in the same definition that Chris supplied earlier. So something along those lines, I think, is where we would support the discussion going.
So it sounds like you guys are directing us that we should take a look at expanding the first right to apply to the deployment of some sort of scientific measuring devices with sideboards. That's what I've heard here so far.
There's not consensus about that.
Yeah, so it sounds like you guys are open to looking at some language that Chris would craft, not that you bought into it.
Yeah.
And that those would be under the 140 language and not the 125.
That's what I'm thinking, but I'm thinking we could say that we would still issue. I'm struggling administratively, and I'll keep this quick because I know we need to move on. Breaking out acoustic Doppler current profilers deployed by an ocean energy company and putting them under 140, and then something that's deployed by anyone else, UI, and having that under 125. I don't think it's that difficult to write into the rule that if we have a section, and maybe write a real section on first right to apply and what it means to say that a demonstration project has a first right to apply. And maybe you say that you don't have a first right to apply, and I don't want to lead the rack, you guys can do what you want, but maybe you don't have a first right to apply for an actual ocean energy lease by putting acoustic Doppler current profilers out, but maybe you have a first right to apply for a demonstration project, which gets you to a first right to apply for an ocean energy lease, something like that. But if you want me to look at
draft language,
Drafting.
draft language, draft
is
something
where
for us to look at.
And this is where you should be assertive, I believe, as a staffer for the agency. I'm undergoing a code amendment process for the Lincoln County plan that's been around forever, and dealing with consultants and yeah, there are policy issues, but there's sort of the natural flow within a regulatory structure that things really ought to be. And it's not really a policy matter as much as you just got to respect the integrity of that flow, and that really should be more about coherence and order within the agency and keeping it in the right track than just sort of let's just throw it over here because. So I would encourage you to assert yourself from an agency perspective.
Sounds good. So with that in mind, then I'll try to have the broader takeaway here and
well, the broader takeaway is you are miles away from all of us agreeing that that's an appropriate approach.
Yep. And we haven't heard from
Chris?
Yes. Who is this?
This is Walter. This is Walter. I just wanted to, this whole thing between research and the industry, if I could put it in a nutshell, I would just like this to be, keep research separate from the industry, and you need to acknowledge that there's a difference between doing research and prospecting. And if they're prospecting, they're not doing research. And that's just my comment.
Thank you, Walter. And I want to give Laurel. Laurel, do you have anything to say? We haven't heard. Swanky. Okay, give you an opportunity if you had something you
I
already
had
had.
something a while ago, but it wasn't important enough
Okay.
to stop the conversation. So,
Justin, clear for you.
No, nothing to add. I just concur. I think it makes sense to explore language on first rights.
And we'll probably need to check in with the director as well, make sure.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to suggest we go ahead and take our break now, since we're halfway through the meeting. But let's keep it to 5 minutes, please. So let's reconvene at 20 of 3, and Jason's going to do his presentation pretty darn quick.
Awesome. Would that we had this structure with the Oregon Water Resources Department and all the wells being drilled all the time. Talk about a review of natural resources that really needs to happen. Oh my God. This is awesome.
I mean, they can all this goes. There's not a lot
Yeah,
to say about
right.
the checklist.
But, so I agree. So why don't we make sure that obviously we get the removal fill, GAGP thing, and talk about the jargon, because those two topics kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
We have a TSP rehash.